All right, let's jump straight into this explainer, because we really need to talk about a strange and honestly super frustrating reality that you've probably noticed every single time you tap your card lately. Your grocery bills, your rent, your restaurant meals, and even those weekend flights are just higher than ever. It really feels like our money just isn't going nearly as far as it used to, doesn't it?
You know, the news keeps telling us that inflation is technically under control or cooling down, but you definitely aren't feeling that relief in your wallet, right? So, if inflation is handled, why does literally everything still feel so incredibly expensive? Well, today we're going to dig into the hidden systems and those massive macro forces that are quietly working behind the scenes to keep prices sky high.
So, part one, the everyday price shock. Let's just start with a quick reality check to validate exactly what you are feeling on a day-to-day basis. Just imagine walking into your local supermarket back in 2019 with 5,000 rupees. You'd probably walk out with a completely stuffed grocery cart. But today, that exact same 5,000 rupees gets you a noticeably smaller pile of groceries. It perfectly highlights this really frustrating truth. For most people, incomes simply haven't grown at the exact same pace as those checkout totals. You are working just as hard, but taking home way less.
Which brings us to part two, the global economic collision. To really understand why this is happening, we have to zoom out a bit. We need to look at the massive historic economic collision that kicked off back in 2020. It all started with what we can call the money flood. When the global economy practically shut down a few years ago, governments and central banks panicked. They faced an unprecedented crisis. So to prevent a massive depression with thousands of businesses closing, they basically injected trillions of dollars directly into the economy and slashed interest rates to near zero. Suddenly, cheap money was just flooding the global system. And sure, at first glance, it seemed like the perfect rescue plan. But when you pump that much cash into a system way faster than goods are actually being produced, well, you're lighting the fuse for rising prices.
And here is where the real crash happens. Right at the exact same time as that historic money flood, we got hit with a massive supply chain shock. Global factories were completely shut down, major shipping ports turned into giant traffic jams, leaving massive cargo containers just completely stalled out at sea. Because of all this, raw materials became incredibly scarce, and businesses suddenly realized they just didn't have enough actual products to sell to us.
So it all boils down to some pretty simple math. More money chasing fewer goods equals inflation. These two forces happening at the exact same time, the huge injection of cash and the sudden halt of global manufacturing, created the absolute perfect mathematical recipe for inflation, and it spread like wildfire across almost every single industry simultaneously. From the microchips in your laptop to the timber used to build houses, everything suddenly became much more expensive to make and buy. To make matters worse, we have the energy effect, which literally added fuel to the fire. Think about it. Energy impacts nearly everything you buy. The farmer growing your food needs fuel. The trucking company transporting it, fuel. The factory processing it needs electricity. The cargo ship moving it needs fuel. And your local supermarket needs power just to keep the lights and refrigerators on. So when global energy prices spiked, every single step of that entire supply chain got more expensive. And businesses, well, they don't just eat those extra costs, they pass them straight on to you.
Moving on to part three, squeezing your wallet. Let's zoom back in from those global shipping ports directly to your personal bank account and see how these big forces are actively draining your finances. You really have to think about a 7% inflation rate as a silent, hidden tax. Say you've got one lakh sitting safely in a savings account, and inflation is averaging around 7%. Your actual purchasing power is quietly shrinking by that 7% every single year. You don't get a bill in the mail for it, nobody asks your permission. The number in your bank account looks exactly the same, which feels safe, but the actual real-world stuff that money can buy, it's just slowly evaporating without you even noticing. And honestly, this squeeze is probably most obvious and definitely most painful in the housing market. For years, historically low interest rates encouraged investors to pour money into real estate, which drove property prices absolutely through the roof. But now, the climate has completely changed and interest rates have skyrocketed. So today's buyers are trapped by this brutal double challenge. You're facing those historically high home prices from the low-rate era, colliding head-on with the painfully expensive new loans of today's high-rate era. Oh, and there is another heavily overlooked factor we have to mention: corporate pricing power.
During inflation, costs go up, so companies naturally raise their prices, right? But here's the catch. Sometimes companies realize that we, the consumers, are actually willing, or honestly forced, to pay those higher prices even after their temporary supply chain costs drop back down. This establishes a permanent, much more expensive new normal. We just adjust our expectations, the businesses enjoy wider profit margins, and those prices, yeah, they rarely drop back down.
Let's look at part 4, the psychology of expensive. Because we really have to recognize that this whole thing isn't just about spreadsheets and macroeconomics. It's a massive mind game happening inside your head every time you tap your card. Human psychology is exactly why inflation feels so deeply personal. See, our brains are constantly comparing today's prices with yesterday's memories. When your favorite morning coffee suddenly jumps 30% in price, you don't rationalize it by pulling up last month's global supply chain data. No way. Your brain anchors straight to the memory of what that exact same cup of coffee used to cost a couple of years ago. You notice when movie tickets double. You really feel it when rent jumps. That intense emotional friction between what things cost today and what your brain remembers they should cost, that is why living in the current economy just feels so emotionally exhausting. Which brings us to part 5, what happens next? With all of these hidden forces stacked against our wallets and our memories, where do we actually go from here? When you look at the whole picture, we've really been living through the ultimate perfect storm. We had massive money creation, disrupted supply chains, huge energy shocks, wild housing inflation, higher interest rates, stubborn corporate pricing power, and on top of it all, that heavy psychological impact. It was literally a historic collision of independent economic and psychological forces that permanently altered our baseline cost of living. So this naturally leads us to the ultimate question, the one absolutely everybody is constantly asking. Will prices ever actually go back down? Like, are we ever going to see those 2019 prices that we miss so much? Well, the hard historical truth is, usually no. I mean, while the rate of inflation might slow down, meaning prices stop rising quite so incredibly fast, widespread price drops across the board are extremely rare. But economies are pretty resilient. They do adjust over time through higher baseline wages, increased worker productivity, the rollout of new technologies, and overall economic growth. Basically, the whole system slowly adapts to meet this new elevated baseline. Understanding these hidden systems gives you a massive advantage. You can't just sit around waiting for prices to magically drop back to 2019 levels. That's just not going to happen. But what you can do is navigate this new reality by shifting your focus and energy toward increasing your own earning power. Level up your skills, invest wisely, and outpace that silent tax. So I will leave you with this to ponder. Now that you actually know the hidden forces driving up the cost of living, what is your next move to ensure your income outpaces the new normal?